When someone is going to be crucified, and I'm sorry if this gets a bit graphic, but the fact of the matter is there are people who deny the death of Jesus on the cross. I was one of them. Throughout my young adulthood, I denied that Jesus died on the cross. But when I saw this evidence, for me, this was so compelling that it challenged me, it shook me to my core. Because the Quran says Jesus did not die by crucifixion, and yet here was the evidence. Here, take a listen to this. The process of crucifixion starts off with flogging, and we see from the Gospels that Jesus was also flogged, and this is a normal for the crucifixion process. The flogging involves using a Roman flagrum, a whip. This whip has multiple leather cords that come off of it. Each of these leather cords has multiple leather balls, which on those leather balls have metal dumbbells and shards of sheep bone. So you've got a whip, multiple cords, leather balls with metal dumbbells and shards of sheep bone. The victim is then tied to a flogging post, and this whip is used to hit the victim repeatedly. The whip is designed the way it is because the metal dumbbells cause vasodilation of the blood vessels near the skin. The blood vessels dilate, pain receptors and chemicals are brought closer to the surface of the skin. It's going to hurt a lot, and you're going to bleed a lot. They were very systematic in the way they designed their crucifixion process. The sheep bone was then designed to reach into the skin, latch onto it, and rip it out. People would bleed to death by the flogging process. Some people's intestines fell out during the flogging process because the whip would reach around to their abdomen, weaken the abdominal wall to the point where the intestines fell out. Cicero records that people's arteries and veins were laid bare during the flogging process. That's why it was called the pre-death. People died during the flogging alone. It's also interesting to note that the people who were doing this to Jesus were not Jewish at this point. These were the Roman soldiers who were flogging Jesus. And the reason why that's important to note is because Jews had a law from the mitzvot, from the Old Testament, that they were not to flog anyone more than 40 times. So Jews would have someone actually counting. As they were flogging, they'd have someone counting how many times a person was flogged. And once they got to 39, they would stop, just in case someone had miscounted. They wanted to make absolutely sure no one broke God's law and went to 40 or 41. Romans, especially at this time, were very spiteful of the Jews. And so oftentimes they'd get to 40 and start whipping even more, just to spite the Jews and their laws. And so the fact that Jesus was being flogged by Romans makes us think there's a chance that his flogging was worse than the average flogging. And there's more reason to think that, actually, because you look at the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, it's pretty clear that Pilate, the person who's crucifying and flogging Jesus, doesn't want Jesus to die. He's trying to release him. So he tells the crowd, look, I've crucified him, I've flogged him, isn't that enough? Isn't that enough? Now, of course, they were expecting him to be flogged already, so what sense does it make for him to say, oh, he's flogged, isn't that enough? It would only make sense if he had flogged him worse than they were expecting. So we have good reason to believe, for two separate reasons, that Jesus was flogged worse than the average person. And as Cicero has said, it's one of the most gruesome processes. If any of you want more information on the crucifixion process, read Martin Hengel's book, Crucifixion. He provides some historical records in there that are so compelling. For example, no one other than Roman non-citizens were allowed to be flogged and crucified. The crucifixion process was so bad that citizens weren't allowed to be crucified. In fact, people have said, let no Roman even think the word crucifixion. That's how painful and devastating and humiliating the flogging and crucifixion process is. But it's not done yet. After a person's skin is hanging off from them in ribbons, they are then placed on a cross. Now, that's not a gentle process by any means. A person was often made to carry the cross beam through the streets as a sign of additional humiliation. Look, they could kill you by beheading you if they wanted to. The crucifixion process is designed to humiliate you and weaken you and prolong the process of death. And so Jesus is carrying the crossbeam to the place of his crucifixion. And of course that happens while he's bleeding and naked. They don't allow any clothes while that's happening. Once they get to the place of the crucifixion, their hands are nailed And hands in that time applied to anything from your fingertips to your wrists. They were nailed right here through the ulna and the radius, because that's where your weight could be sustained while you're hanging. Nailed through there. There's a nerve that runs there. It's called the median nerve. This is the major sensory motor nerve of your arm. If you pierce that nerve, your hand is immediately incapacitated. And if you can imagine tapping your funny bone and how much pain that causes, imagine piercing a nail through it. There's a reason why they had to invent a word to describe the crucifixion process and how painful it is. The word excruciating means ex cruce, off the cross. This is an excruciating process. You've got nails driven through both sides here, and then you have a 7-inch nail driven through your feet. The reason why a nail is driven through your feet is because if they hang you up by just your arms, you're going to hang, and you're not going to be able to breathe out after a while. You're not going to have the strength to pull yourself up in order to breathe. You hang, your rib cage is extended, you don't have the ability to provide that negative pressure to breathe in, and you're going to die of asphyxiation. So what they do is they nail you through your feet so you can push up off your feet to continue breathing. This is not a mercy. It prolongs the death of someone until they decide to finish you off. When they do that, there are multiple ways, but there was always a Roman death blow involved in the process of the crucifixion. These death blows sometimes looked like knees being broken. You see in the Gospels that the people next to Jesus, their knees are broken. Why is that? Because if you break someone's knees, they can no longer push up in order to breathe. So they die by suffocating. Or sometimes bodies were lit on fire while still on the cross. In fact, when the Jews were revolting after Jesus' death, right before the temple was destroyed, one of the things that the Romans did was they crucified Jews in various positions and lit their bodies on fire all around the city of Jerusalem. It said that their bodies lit up the place like torches. People's bodies would be lit on fire. Sometimes people's bodies would be taken down and thrown to a pit of dogs, and the dogs would eat them. In fact, scholar John Dominic Crossan says this is likely what happened to Jesus. He's a member of the Jesus Seminar. You can tell he's not Christian belief. He says that Jesus' body was fed to dogs. Sometimes people's heads were crushed. Now Jesus, what happened to him? He was speared through the heart. That was the death blow administered to Jesus. The Romans are making absolutely sure you die by this process. And